What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is GemmaJade, but today we are going to be discussing the Hinterkaifeck farm murders. I have been wanting for years to bring this case to my channel, and believe it or not, the very silly reason I haven't yet is because I couldn't for the life of me remember what the name of the farm was. After becoming more stubborn than ever before about looking into this case, I scoured the internet with all of the little details that I could remember, and I finally came up with the name of the case, and when I did, I realized why I was having such a hard time remembering the name. Hinterkaifeck. This case has fascinated me ever since I heard about it a couple of decades ago and before I even knew that YouTube was a thing. I still haven't been able to figure out definitively what actually happened here, but I look forward anyway to discussing it with you all here today and seeing what you all think about it. This case might even be known to some of you, but I have come to understand that for the most part outside of Germany, people really aren't aware of how strange and bizarre what happened in this one really is. It comes from the extremely beautiful and desolate, remote, majestic alpine forests of the Germanic state of Bavaria. This place is pristine and stunningly gorgeous as far as the scenery is concerned and would be one of the last places on earth one would ever expect to be the setting for a mysterious and grisly multiple murder. So let's go back in time a little bit to the year 1922 to the quiet and isolated farmstead called Hinterkaifeck and take a look at one of the most mysterious, brutal, and bizarre murders ever to happen in German history. Let's jump right in. But before I do, I want to say thank you to my patrons, to my members, to everyone who donates on a weekly basis in stream, outside of stream, PayPal, Cash App, Stevens Venmo. You guys supporting me, buying my books. I really just appreciate everything you all do. I'm going to be naming my members by name again, but it's going to be if you're a member for 3 months or more, because otherwise it changes really quickly and I can't keep track of everyone and then I'm naming the wrong people and it's complicated. Let's jump right in, guys. So Hinterkaifeck was a farm located in the middle of the woods, almost in the middle of nowhere, in the forest outside of Großbeuren, which is a town in between the slightly larger Bavarian towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen. Forgive my pronunciations in this one, which are an hour's drive from Munich. The Gruber family occupied the farm at the time, and they consisted of husband Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their middle-aged daughter Victoria, who was also a widow, and their 2 grandkids, Victoria's children, 7-year-old Kazilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Or maybe it's Joseph, but I'm going to call him Joseph. This family lived in a pretty isolated conditions and were relatively separate from most of the rest of the world around them. Hinterkaifeck farm was nestled away in a forest that was about 1 kilometer away from the main town in the area called Kaifeck. Even though the farm was very remote and out of the way of most of the people from nearby towns, the family were well known in all of the surrounding areas, but I wouldn't say here that they were really well known for any of the right kinds of reasons, except maybe Victoria. Andreas was known not only as a loner, but as being very dour and unfriendly, and it was a well-known fact that he regularly beat his wife. Most of the people in the nearest towns didn't like him at all and had no respect for him. It was also rumored that his youngest grandchild, 2-year-old Joseph, was biologically his son, and you guys can do the math on that because YouTube will demonetize me if I say anything more about that. I will say that it was also very well known that Andreas was absolutely obsessed with his daughter Victoria, so much so that after her husband died tragically, he had forbidden her to ever marry again and told her she had to stay on his farm under his own watchful eye until the day that he died. She was under his strict control, just like everyone else on the farm and in the Gruber family was. He ruled with an iron fist, and in addition to mistreating and being violent towards his wife, it was a well-known fact that he was also extremely violent towards all of his young children, of which Victoria was the only survivor of the abuse. So they had more kids than just Victoria. But it's said that for the most part, Andreas's abuse towards them when they were very small is what caused them to not survive. Okay, so here's your trigger warning after the trigger. Sorry, I don't do trigger warnings, guys. In general, the family was said to be reclusive and sullen, and they really didn't talk to or deal with anyone else outside of the farmhouse. In fact, Victoria was the only one who had gotten a good reputation, and that was because she had a beautiful singing voice and sang in the church choir whenever she had the opportunity to do so, which was almost every week. There were always rumors about what went on in the farmhouse, and most of the times the rumors actually were true. That is, until one day the maid suddenly left and quit her job, leaving immediately and almost running out the door without any explanation being given at that time. This is when the farm's descent into high strangeness is said to have begun. Finally, eventually, that maid gave an answer as to why she felt the need to leave so suddenly and give up the only meager income she had been able to bring in. The maid's name was Maria, and she said she had left so suddenly and refused to ever go back because she had started suddenly hearing strange noises that didn't belong in the home and strange voices as well. All throughout the house, all hours of the day and night, there would be strange voices, strange noises. She was stricken with terror and insisted that the house was haunted, and she never did go back or spend another second in that farmhouse. She only took with her what she could carry and left the rest of her meager belongings behind. She must have been really, really scared. I love how she immediately went to "it's haunted." I just really love that, because at this time, this is really saying something, guys, because if you really think about this time period this was happening in and how hard it would have been presumably to get a job in the first place, let alone to keep one when witnessing such aggression and violence from the patriarch of the family you work for. I mean, if that didn't already drive her off, she must have really needed the income. But she was so convinced the house was haunted that she gave it all up just to never have to spend another second in the home. Not to mention, people didn't really have that many possessions back then, so it just says a lot about how terrified and convinced the farm was haunted she really was, that she would leave whatever she couldn't carry with her behind and never go back to get it. When Maria said goodbye to the family, she was said to have been pale-faced and emaciated, though I don't know what her weight had to do with her hearing what she thought were ghosts. The groupers didn't believe Maria's reasoning for quitting for 1 second and merely chalked it up to her possibly dealing with some personal issues she didn't want to discuss with them, or even they chalked it up to her possibly being mentally ill in some way. About 6 months after Maria's sudden departure, things would get even more strange on the property. In March of 1922, Andreas was out surveying the property after a huge snowstorm when he saw a set of very large footprints that seemingly originated in the forest surrounding the house, but they led right up to the house itself. Eerily enough, there were no footprints at all, let alone of the same kind, that led from the home and back into the woods. Andreas carefully went around and searched the entire property of the farm, but found no trace of who the phantom footprints belonged to. There were none anywhere else. Just a straight shot from the woods and to his home, and that was all. Andreas immediately became alarmed and thought there was a potentially dangerous intruder hiding somewhere inside of his home, and so he conducted a very thorough search of the entire farmhouse, in and outside, and the surrounding property again, but he couldn't find anything or any signs at all that anyone besides he and his family had ever entered the house or been in the area at all. All there were footprints. He literally checked everywhere. The only odd thing was that the one set of footprints were there and they couldn't be explained. Keep in mind, it wasn't just a lack of footprints, but a lack of any evidence whatsoever that anyone else had ever been around there. He searched the main farmhouse, the barn, the tool shed, and anywhere else he could think of, but it was all for nothing because he never found anything. The same night that happened, Andreas, who was probably on high alert due to the strange findings earlier that day with the footprints, was woken up suddenly in the middle of the night by strange and inexplicable noises coming from the attic. He immediately thought of Maria and the fact that she had insisted that the house was haunted. She was hearing the same sorts of strange noises. He realized that though he didn't believe in ghosts, the attic would be the perfect place for an intruder, a human intruder, to hide. And so he got up, got his light, and went to search the attic. He didn't find anything or anyone. And even though he was a bit rattled by everything he had been through that day, he knew a human being couldn't just vanish into thin air, and was confident that there had been a trespasser in his home or on his property, that if there had been one, he would have found them. So he went back to sleep. He woke up the next morning to another strange sight. On his porch, he found a newspaper, but it was one that no one in the family recognized, and they all said they hadn't ordered it and knew nothing of why it should have been on their porch. About a week later, on the 30th of March, 1922, a set of house keys went missing, and the family were never able to find them. While looking for the set of keys, Andreas saw that there were odd scratch marks all over the lock to the tool shed, looking as though someone had tried to pick it. The very next day, on March 31st, the family's new maid arrived to replace the one they'd so suddenly lost. The maid's name was also Maria, and her last name was Baumgartner. Maria's first day on the job was her last, and it was also the last day anyone would see anyone in the Gruber family alive. A few days later, on April 4th, some of the people in the town started to become concerned about the well-being of the Gruber family. No one had seen anyone in the family for days, but more than that, little 7-year-old Cazelia had not shown up for school, which was rare and odd. In addition to that, none of them had been to church, and they had a lot of unclaimed mail piling up at the local post office, which was something unusual as they picked up their mail often up to that point. Victoria was a very high-standing member of the church choir and never missed a single service because of that. People were very concerned about her and the rest of her family, and so a few people from town decided that they were going to get together and go out to the farm and make sure everything was okay, see if the Grubers needed anything. The search party arrived at the farm and knocked on the door, while others walked around the farm and called out loudly, hoping to hear a response from the family. The people who were there that day said the whole farm was eerily silent, even though a preliminary search of the outside of the property turned up no clues as to what could have happened to the family. Nothing seemed amiss from the outside, but it was very odd that no one was answering their calling out to them, and also they weren't answering the banging on their door. They eventually made their way over to the barn, and upon opening the door, they were all met with a shocking and grisly sight. Lying on the floor in the barn in a pool of blood were the bodies of Andreas, his wife and his daughter, and their granddaughter Cazelia, who was only 7 years old at the time. Their bodies had been oddly stacked very carefully, one on top of the other, and piles of hay were neatly placed on top of the bodies. The searchers were horrified. I mean, imagine this. And they frantically ran to the house to try and find 2-year-old Joseph to see if he was okay or if he had met the same fate as the rest of his family. They quickly found him lying on his cot in his mother's bedroom, deceased and covered in blood. And Maria, the new maid, was found in her bedroom in the same condition and seemingly having met the same fate as little Joseph and the rest of the Gruber family. Joseph and the maid were lying in puddles of coagulated blood, meaning they most likely had been lying there for some time. In total, they found 6 people, 5 members of the Gruber family, and their 1 brand new maid, and they all had been brutally murdered in cold blood. The terrified town people called the police immediately, and though it took a couple of hours for them to get out there, the Munich Police Department's investigators finally arrived on the scene. The preliminary autopsies of the victims showed that they had all been killed with blows to the head that had been inflicted by a pickaxe. Victoria's body showed signs of strangulation, but that was found not to have been the actual cause of her death. The pickaxe was. The investigators said that the perpetrator had to have been very familiar with the use of a pickaxe because all of the wounds had not only been confidently delivered, but they had been very precise as well. There was no hesitation in any of the blows, and there had been one single blow decisively delivered to the head of each victim. All of the victims except one were thought to have died instantly. The family's matriarch, Andreas's wife Cazelia, was thought to have laid for hours suffering, unable to move after the fatal blow that was delivered to her head. Also very strange was the fact that several tufts of her hair were said to have been ripped out and lying all around her for unknown reasons. Everyone except Victoria and her mother were dressed in their pajamas, and the investigators thought that fact, plus the fact that little Joseph and the maid were already in bed, meant that the murders had more than likely been committed at nighttime before most of the family went to sleep for the night. Upon further investigation, the authorities believed that the killer had lured Andreas, Cazelia, and Victoria out to the barn somehow, one by one, and then ambushed them once they entered. I wonder how someone would lure 3 people to their deaths individually. Did one after the other go to investigate a strange noise or something? I mean, how does that work? I don't know. It just makes no sense to me, but it's a bit beside the point, I guess. So anyway, after they suspected the killer did that, he or she went into the farmhouse and killed Maria and Joseph while they slept. They also believed that Victoria and Cazelia, the mother, had been the first to be killed because they weren't in their pajamas and they went out to investigate whatever it was that drew them out to the barn. One detail that investigators noticed was that all the corpses had been covered somehow. The bodies in the barn had been stacked one on top of the other and then covered in hay. Maria, the maid's body, had been covered up with her sheets, and little Joseph's body was, oddly enough, covered in his mother's long skirts and petticoats. Upon further analysis, though, the investigators found some even stranger things as far as the bodies and these killings were concerned. The official date of the death was determined to have been March 31st, 1922, which was a Friday. But after talking to some of the closest neighbors to the farm, the investigators uncovered some bizarre information regarding that date. The neighbors, and remember, this was an isolated farmhouse, so they weren't exactly that close, but They did say that they had seen smoke coming out of the chimney the entire weekend. I don't know how to say that word. So someone had been in the home and keeping themselves warm even after it's thought the family had been slaughtered. There was more evidence found in the house that someone had been eating meals there all weekend long, or at the very least past Friday, and one of the beds had been slept in almost, or seemingly at least, right up until the bodies were discovered. Like someone was sleeping, heard the commotion, and took off. So basically, until the search party showed up, someone was there. Strangely enough, too, all of the livestock on the farm were well fed and had been receiving full portions of food throughout the entire weekend. The bowls, vats, and whatever else farm animals eat out of were filled when investigators arrived to examine the crime scene, which means someone had been there taking good care of the animals even after the family had been killed. Not to mention, too, none of the animals on the farm, the livestock or the pets, were harmed in any way, shape, or form, and like I said, had been well taken care of even after the family died or were killed. That's odd because remember, we're talking about not just a weekend, but a full week that the family was thought to have been dead here. Someone killed this entire family, then went about the farms and their own business in the home for an entire week, and seemingly only left the crime scene when they knew the jig was up and the people from the town showed up looking for everyone. And yet no one saw them escape. Nobody saw anybody except for the bodies. The family's pet dog was found barking in the barn, but upon further inspection, the authorities saw that it had been patiently and gently tied up by more than likely whoever had killed this family. And although it was a bit shaken up, it was perfectly fine, well fed, water and food in the bowls, and seemingly healthy. Nobody could understand why or how someone would go and kill an entire family and then stick around to take care of the animals and make themselves at home for an entire week before fleeing the scene only when they were about to be discovered. I keep kind of like beating a dead horse with this because this is not only eerie and creepy and macabre, it's crazy. Remember, this was 1922 in Germany. They hadn't seen as much back then as we have now, and this was probably incredibly confusing for them. When the police went about trying to find a motive for why anyone would want to murder this entire family, including the children, they would run into even more bizarre clues. At first, they thought that maybe simple robbery was the answer. The Grubers were very wealthy, and it wasn't uncommon for thieves and vagrants to be all over that particular area at that time. But although some cash had been taken off of the bodies of the corpses, a ton of gold coins and very expensive jewelry hadn't been touched. It was reasoned that if someone had been hanging all around the farm for an entire week, they would have eventually come across the gold and the jewelry. A few weeks before the murders as well, Victoria had completely emptied her bank account and left a $700 gold mark donation to her church for what she called, quote, missionary work, end quote. It's worth noting here that 700 gold marks in 1922 Germany would be almost $17,000 today in American money. Anyway, the rest of Victoria's sizable account was unaccounted for, and still to this day, no one knows if this had anything to do with the murders or if it's just another odd detail we might never get the answers for. Another theory was that the murders had been some sort of crime of passion aimed at the family. Suspicion immediately fell upon one of Victoria's suitors, a man named Lawrence Schlittenbauer. Up until the day she died, Victoria had told everyone and insisted adamantly that Lawrence was Joseph's father, but because everyone in the village and nearby towns thought that Joseph had been the result of that incestuous affair between Victoria and her dad, it was thought that Lawrence could have possibly lashed out in a jealous rage at everyone in the family. Or it could have been to escape alimony payments that he eventually thought he would have to pay for Joseph because of Victoria's constant and continual insistence that the baby was his, and not to mention the fact that Victoria had just been about to sue him for these payments right before everyone was murdered. To add to the suspicion on him, it was thought that because Lawrence had remarried and had a very young child that died, the authorities figured he wouldn't want to pay for a child he couldn't even have been sure was his when he couldn't even care for his own baby because the child had died so young, and it could have possibly triggered something in him that caused him to lash out in a violent rage. There were other odd details that seemingly pointed towards Lawrence being the murderer as well. Firstly, he seemingly just happened to be one of the people who was involved in the original search party that went out to the farm to check on the family. And the other people who were there with him that day said that the dog was tied up and anxious in the barn, but it was seemingly fine, just a little shooken up. But it was much more aggressive and agitated towards Lawrence than it was toward anyone else. The dog was barely making a sound, but the whole time he was in Lawrence's sight, it barked incessantly and growled at him. Also, the other people said that he didn't seem to feel any type of way at all about the blood, gore, and the dead bodies in general. Everyone else was freaking out, and some people even became sick at the sight of the carnage, but Lawrence just kept his cool the whole time and had even been the one to volunteer to unstack the bodies in the barn without any emotion at all and without the slightest hint of disgust or sadness. Stoic, nothing. Just, I'll do it, like he's, unstacking bales of hay or something. The other people that were with him warned him against touching anything, particularly the bodies, before the police were able to get there. However, Lawrence was completely unconcerned and just, again, very stoically, went about unstacking them while insisting he, quote, had to find his boy, end quote. Besides all of this, there was also the fact that he seemed oddly and uncommonly familiar with the farm and the farmhouse and had navigated himself around the place effortlessly as if he had spent a ton of time there, which he hadn't. He hadn't ever been there. He was questioned extensively and more than once by investigators, but at the end of the day, they had no actual evidence that he had done anything wrong, aside from the fact that he was objectively too calm in such a tragic and horrifying situation. Lawrence Schlittenbauer was never charged or arrested for any involvement in this crime. I wonder, was he trying to, I know they didn't have DNA back then, but, was he trying to get, his fingerprints and stuff, oh, my hair, one of my hairs is on the dead bodies because I was the one that unstacked them, right? Or I have skin cells or whatever under my fingers because I was unstacking them. I don't think they tested for that stuff. I don't even know if they had fingerprints in Germany, in Munich in 1922. But it's just odd to me. I don't know. It's very weird. Besides who the killer was, there's a ton of other things that were very odd and off about this case. Had the perpetrator been hiding out on the farm for a while before committing this crime? If so, then where had he been? Because if you remember, Andreas looked all over and everywhere multiple times in the nights and weeks leading up to the murders. I mean, most people believe the footprints in the snow coming out of the woods and leading up to the home and the noises in the attic were in fact the intruder. But these events were happening for a really long time before anyone was actually killed. Think about it. If the original maid who had quit because she thought she was hearing evidence of a haunting had actually been hearing this killer, that would mean he was hanging out and hiding in and around the property for at least a full 6 months. Also, why would the killer have been so comfortable staying in the house and going about the usual business of the farm, taking care of the animals, feeding them, feeding himself, making himself at home as though he lived there and owned the place for at least a full week after the murders? All great questions. All without any answers because this case is still very much unsolved. The bodies of all of the family and the maid were eventually buried in a cemetery in Weidhofen, but they were all buried without their heads because unfortunately the heads had all been sent to Munich for further analysis and had never been returned for whatever reason. The skulls were eventually thought to have just been lost or something during World War II, and no one knows what became of them, unfortunately. And that is really sad. It's just so macabre to me because this family doesn't have heads when they were buried, and while that shouldn't matter, I'm now stuck in a perpetual state of picturing it, and that sucks for me. Also, I almost called Andreas Gruber Hans Gruber like every other sentence, so there's that. Anyway, the 6 headless bodies are buried alongside a memorial to them. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders has lasted for 102 years, with people nowadays just as interested in who could have committed such a heinous and horrible crime, and then to have been smart enough, or at least thorough enough, maybe even convincing enough, to have gotten away with it. That last one depends on whether or not you believe Lawrence was the culprit. Over 100 suspects were questioned in the years following this crime, but the police never got any closer to solving the mystery and figuring out who did it. The police got so desperate at one point that they hired clairvoyants to handle the skulls of the deceased to see if they could pick anything up. This case, in my opinion, has stimulated just as much speculation as Jack the Ripper, only, and this is possibly due to how hard it is to say the name of the farm for most people who aren't German, and that's only in my opinion. Not too many people talk about this case except for amateur sleuths online. So let's talk about some of the other theories that have sprung up over the years, and they range from the rational to the fringe and very bizarre. Interestingly enough, some people do believe that Victoria's ex-husband, a man named Carl Gabriel, carried out the murders, even though he was supposedly killed in World War I. His body hadn't ever been found, and he hadn't ever been given a proper burial, so it was speculated that he might have come back for his wife and daughter. If that were the case, then he more than likely would have heard about her alleged incestuous affair with her father and her affair with Lawrence Schlittenbauer, not to mention her young son Joseph. By this theory, he snapped and murdered them all in a crime of passion. This theory was fueled by two people who had later come forward and said that they had met a Russian soldier after World War II who had claimed to them that he had been, quote, the Hinterkaifeck killer, end quote. It was speculated that Carl had initially faked his own death in order to be rid of his wife, but then changed his mind and came back to all the rumors and innuendo about her. There are some people, myself included, but only before I had actually looked into the details of this case, who believe there was some sort of paranormal element to this case that most people overlook. What about the ghosts who seemingly ran the first maid out of the house? Not to mention Andreas also heard strange noises he could not find a reason for. The mysterious newspaper and footprints in the snow that only led one way. To some people, it's at least a reason to consider that something paranormal might have been going on here. However, and I say this with as much confidence as possible, ghosts and spirits almost never have the ability to kill a human being, and even when they can or do, they don't use things like pickaxes. Some people have put this case out there without mentioning how they were all killed and or without talking about all of the suspects and other details that point to a human intruder. They want to make it mysterious and supernatural. I'm saying, though, not only do spirits and ghosts and demons and witches and whatever you can think of not kill with pickaxes, they also don't feed livestock or have any reason themselves to sleep in beds and eat human food when they're done. This was not some vengeful, evil, supernatural force that set its sights on this family. This was done by a flesh and bone human being, and it was more than likely Lawrence S., as far as my opinion. The Munich Police Department had occasionally reopened the case from time to time since 1922. They did so in both 1996 and again in 2007, but both times they ran into nothing but dead ends. The police said that this case more than likely will never be solved due to how much time has already passed. Evidence is scarce and most of it has been lost throughout the last century. All of the witnesses and suspects have died, and the investigative techniques back then were so primitive, which means the records are incomplete and there's almost nothing, no evidence or anything left at all. They even lost the skulls of the victims, so I agree there's not many places to go with the investigation nowadays besides speculation, rumor, and innuendo. However, people are still trying to solve it though, and look at us, we're here talking about it today on this channel. The farm was demolished in 1923 by villagers who lived nearby who didn't want it there anymore because it was becoming a death monument for gawkers and weirdos all around coming to look at where the crimes were committed without much thought to the fact that human beings, people actually died here in a very horrific way. It's tragic. It's not a sightseeing tour, although I do understand the interest. There's a monument now that stands in place of where the farm was in honor of the victims and the horrors that happened to them there so long ago. Who knows? Maybe those trees that stood there so long ago and that still stand today will ever be the only living things that know what really happened here. It's said in Germany that this case is absolutely legendary. So I wanted to ask my German friends, mainly my friend Alexander Yu, what do you all think? And is there anything I missed that you know of or that I got wrong? Is this case really that legendary? Leave your thoughts in the comments, please, whether you're from Germany or not. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. If you enjoyed hanging out with me, spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Most of the people who watch my channel, watch my videos, and go into my live streams aren't subscribed. Look, we're already going together. Let's just make it official, okay? Don't be playing games with me. Check out the description box for important links, ways to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App, and Ghost Dragon ZW's Venmo. All of that pays me for the work that I do. The research, the coming up with the idea, the scripting, the filming, the editing, the uploading, all the time that it takes. One of these videos takes like 8 hours, but I'm not going to bog you down with the details. Please donate if you can. If you want to send me a gift, particularly it's Christmas time, a lot of y'all have been asking. My Amazon wish list gift link is in the description box, so you can send me anything from that list, and there's like thousands of things on there, and then I don't have to get my address out because I still got to get a P.O. box. Guys, remember, donations are the way I get paid. Also, there are links to most of my books. There's 10 or 11 out now. 6 of them went bestseller. Amazon, Kindle, paperback, and Audible. If you want to see my whole collection, just go to Amazon and type in Gemma Jade Books. For any correspondence to send in your own stories for listener encounters, supernatural, paranormal, extraterrestrial, otherworldly, the weird and the bizarre that you've been through, to receive an autographed copy of any and all of my books from me, email me before making the purchase. Thank you so much to all of my members who have been with me for so long, the new members who just decided to join and support me in that way, my patrons who are so incredibly patient. Remember, guys, I love you all so much and I appreciate you all so much. I really, really do. It means the world to me that you're willing to give to my cause, to my channel, to my dream. Don't forget, I offer personal intuitive oracle readings, an hour to an hour and a half through video chat. I offer spiritual helper boxes, single sprays made with moon water and infused with crystals. I really do a lot. I have subscription boxes for $60 a month, or I have extra large spiritual helper boxes. Right now, I've got the Christmas helper boxes coming out with holiday scents and little Christmassy things that go with all of the crystals and all of the stuff that I put in there. You'd really have to contact me to get more information. GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. Check out the description box. Read the description box. There's so much information in there. The prices may be a little off, but just hit me up. If nobody told you today, you're amazing, you got this, don't let anyone tell you that you can't achieve your dreams, okay? Because I'm living proof that you can. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time.